Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the house settling. A faint creak, a distant shift in the wooden beams above me. I lived alone, and old houses made noises that was normal. But then it happened again. Louder this time, the unmistakable sound of movement. I paused in the middle of the hallway, straining to listen. The noise was faint but deliberate, like someone shifting their weight on the attic floor. My pulse quickened as I stared up at the ceiling, tracing the outline of the attic door. I hadn't been up there in months, and I was certain no one else had either. Forcing myself to stay calm, I walked to the attic entrance and reached for the pull-down cord. My fingers barely brushed it before I hesitated. The sound had stopped the moment I got close, as if whoever or whatever was up there knew I was listening. A cold chill crawled down my spine. I took a step back, trying to think rationally. It could be an animal, maybe a raccoon that had somehow found its way inside. That seemed like the most reasonable explanation. But the weight of the sound, the deliberate way it moved, made me doubt it. Swallowing my fear, I grabbed the cord and pulled. The attic door didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was locked. That didn't make sense. There was no lock on the attic door. It was just a simple hatch that should have opened with a tug. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I took another step back. I pressed my hands against the wood, feeling for any sign of resistance. It was sealed shut, like something was holding it from the other side. I whispered a curse under my breath, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I decided to ignore it for the night. Whatever was up there, I'd deal with it in the morning when I had better light. I locked my bedroom door before going to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something shifting just above me, waiting. By morning, I tried to push the incident out of my mind. Maybe I had dreamed it, or maybe the house had simply shifted in a strange way. But as I stood in the kitchen making coffee, I heard it again. A soft, dragging sound from the attic, slow and deliberate. My hands tightened around the mug. I needed to check. Grabbing a flashlight and a step stool, I made my way back to the attic door. I gave the cord another pull, but it still wouldn't open. My stomach twisted with unease. I needed another way in. I went outside, stepping into the crisp morning air. My house had a small side window leading into the attic, barely large enough for a person to fit through. I grabbed a ladder from the shed and propped it against the wall, my breath coming in short bursts. As I climbed, I tried to steady my nerves. The window was dusty, the glass slightly warped. I peered inside, expecting to see old boxes and forgotten furniture. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a chair positioned directly in the center of the attic, facing the hatch, and in that chair sat a figure, motionless. I jerked back so quickly I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. My breathing turned ragged, my mind struggling to make sense of what I had just seen. The attic was supposed to be empty. There was no way anyone could be up there. For several minutes I stayed frozen on the ladder, gripping the rungs so tightly my knuckles turned white. The figure hadn't moved. It just sat there, shrouded in the dim attic light. I had to be imagining it. Maybe it was just an old mannequin or a forgotten piece of furniture that my mind had twisted into something sinister. Summoning every ounce of courage, I climbed back down and went inside. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage, determined to pry the attic door open. My hands trembled as I wedged the metal into the frame and pushed with all my strength. The wood groaned before finally giving way. The attic door swung open, revealing the narrow passage leading upward. I hesitated only a moment before climbing the ladder, flashlight gripped tightly in my free hand. The attic was thick with dust, the air stale and heavy. My light swept across the room, illuminating stacks of old boxes and forgotten belongings. But the chair the figure was gone. The space where it had been was completely empty. I swallowed hard, stepping deeper into the attic. The floor creaked beneath me, the weight of silence pressing down on my chest. I checked every corner, every shadowed space, but there was no sign of anyone ever being there. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I imagined it? The dust on the floor was undisturbed, no footprints or marks to suggest movement. But I knew what I had seen. That chair had been occupied. Feeling a surge of unease, I backed away toward the exit. Just as I reached the hatch, a whisper brushed against my ear, soft and breathless. My entire body went rigid. I didn't stay to listen. I climbed down as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. I slammed the attic door shut and pushed a chair underneath it, my hands shaking. Whatever was up there, I didn't want to know. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was silent, but I could feel it. A presence just beyond the attic door, waiting. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. And when morning came, I made a decision. I packed my things and left. I never went back. Story 2. The letter was waiting in my mailbox when I got home from work. It was a plain white envelope, unmarked except for my name scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just my name, as if someone had placed it there by hand. I felt a strange unease as I tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper held a short message written in thick black ink. I know you took it. The words were bold, pressed deep into the page, as if the writer had been angry. My stomach twisted as I read the sentence again, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't taken anything. I turned the envelope over, searching for any clue about where it had come from. The paper smelled faintly of something metallic, almost like blood or rust. My hands felt clammy as I dropped it onto the kitchen counter. Someone had gone through the trouble of delivering this by hand, which meant they knew where I lived. I paced my apartment, racking my brain for an explanation. Had someone sent it by mistake? Was this meant for a different person? The idea gave me little comfort because it still meant someone had been outside my door, close enough to leave it there. My mind cycled through recent memories, searching for anything that could explain it. Nothing came to mind. I hadn't borrowed anything from a friend, hadn't picked up something that wasn't mine. Yet the message had an accusing tone, as if the sender was absolutely certain. I thought about tossing it out, but something made me hesitate. Instead, I placed it in my desk drawer, out of sight but not forgotten. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the apartment made me tense, listening for footsteps outside my door. I told myself it was just a stupid prank, maybe a mistake, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were restless, full of shadowed figures watching from the corners. The next morning, I checked the mailbox again, half expecting another letter. There was nothing. I let out a breath, shaking my head at myself. Maybe it really had been a one-time thing, a joke that didn't land. But the paranoia stayed with me, settling in the back of my mind like a dull ache. At work, I found myself distracted, checking my phone constantly. I glanced at the faces of my coworkers, wondering if one of them had sent it. No one seemed to be watching me. By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself to let it go. But when I stepped into my apartment, I froze. The letter was sitting on my coffee table, I hadn't taken it out of the drawer. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stood frozen in the doorway. Someone had been inside. The thought sent a cold wave of fear through me. My apartment was small, only a few rooms, and nothing looked out of place except for the letter. I forced myself to check every room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The locks on my windows were still latched. My door showed no signs of being forced open, but someone had been here. I didn't just misplace the letter. I had put it away, and now it was out in the open. I picked it up carefully, my fingers trembling. The paper felt heavier than before, though I knew that was just my imagination. I turned it over, half expecting more writing to appear. It was the same note, unchanged, but now it felt like a warning. I checked the locks twice before trying to sleep that night. My apartment, which had always felt safe, now felt like a trap. I lay in bed, straining to hear anything out of the ordinary. Hours passed, and eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. I woke up to a sound in the middle of the night. It was faint, just outside my bedroom door. My body went rigid as I held my breath, listening. A soft rustling like someone shifting their weight. Then silence. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on my bedroom door. It was slightly open. I knew I had shut it before bed. My heart pounded as I slowly slid out of bed, my bare feet making no sound on the floor. I crept toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming for me to stop. I pushed it open a little wider, scanning the dimly lit living room. Empty. No movement, no sign of anyone. But the air felt heavier, thick with something I couldn't explain. I stepped forward, my breath shallow, and then I saw it. The letter was on the floor, right in the center of the room. I stared at it, my skin crawling. I hadn't left it there. My stomach twisted violently, and for the first time I felt real fear grip me. Someone was playing a game with me, but I didn't know the rules. I reached down, picked it up, and turned it over. There was a new message. I saw you take it. My breath hitched as I read the words, my mind racing. I still didn't know what it was, but whoever this was, they were convinced I had done something. I dropped the letter and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the police. The officer on the other end sounded skeptical, but agreed to send someone over. When they arrived, I felt ridiculous explaining the situation in an anonymous letter. A door slightly open, a feeling of being watched. They searched my apartment but found no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing, no evidence of an intruder. The officer asked if I had enemies, someone who might want to scare me. I couldn't think of anyone. They suggested it might be a prank and advised me to install extra locks. That was it. No real answers, just a half-hearted suggestion to be cautious. After they left, I sat in my apartment staring at the letter. I thought about leaving, staying with a friend for a few days, but a sick sense of curiosity kept me there. I needed to know why this was happening. That night, I set up my phone to record while I slept. I placed it on my nightstand, camera facing the door. If someone was coming in, I would see them. It took hours to fall asleep, my body rigid with tension. When I woke up, my phone was lying on the floor, face down. A chill ran through me as I picked it up, my fingers numb. The recording was still running. I swallowed hard and pressed play. At first, it was just darkness and silence. Then, around 3 a.m., my bedroom door creaked open. My breath caught as a figure stepped into view, barely visible in the dim light. It stood there for a long time, motionless. Then, slowly, it moved toward my bed. Just before the screen went black, the figure leaned close to the camera and whispered, "You know what you took." Story 3. The soft tapping pulled me from sleep. At first I thought I had imagined it, a lingering sound from a dream. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate knock against the glass. My breath caught as I turned toward the window, heart pounding in the quiet darkness. The blinds were drawn, shielding the outside world from view. I lay still, listening, every nerve on edge. The wind whispered against the house, but that wasn't the sound I had heard. Someone had knocked. I was sure of it. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to move. The floor was cold beneath my feet as I crept toward the window, each step careful, hesitant. I reached for the blinds, my fingers trembling as I pulled them apart just enough to peek through. The yard was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the lawn. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe it was a tree branch, maybe a bird had hit the glass. But as I turned to step away, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The blinds were swaying slightly, as if someone had just let go of them. I froze, my mind racing. Had someone been standing there, watching me? I pressed my back against the wall, listening for any movement outside. The night remained silent, thick with an eerie stillness. I didn't want to look again, but I had to be sure. With a deep breath, I pulled the blinds back fully, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond. The street was empty. The trees stood motionless. The bushes along the fence rustled slightly in the breeze, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet the uneasy feeling in my chest wouldn't fade. I closed the blinds quickly, locking the window before stepping back. My phone sat on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, checking the time. 3:12 a.m. My fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to call someone. The police? A friend? But what would I say? That I heard a noise and got spooked. Shaking my head, I set the phone down and climbed back into bed. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, listening to the silence. Sleep felt impossible now, my body too tense, my mind too alert. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I had just begun to drift off when something made my eyes snap open. A faint creaking sound, so soft I almost missed it. My pulse spiked as I strained to listen. It had come from outside near the back of the house. I sat up slowly, my breath shallow. The sound came again, the unmistakable creak of the wooden deck. Someone was out there. My stomach clenched as I slid out of bed, my movements careful, deliberate. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want whoever it was to know I was awake. Step by step, I moved toward the hallway. The back door had a small window, and I hesitated before peeking through it. The porch light cast a dim glow, illuminating the empty deck. My eyes darted to the yard beyond, searching for movement, for a shadow, for anything. Then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line, barely visible in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed against the door, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move. It just stood there motionless, watching. A cold chill crept down my spine. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I struggled to unlock it. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. My heart pounded as I scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. I locked every door, every window, making sure they were secure. My hands were shaking as I double-checked the locks, my skin prickling with unease. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know what to say. That someone had been watching me, that they had disappeared the moment I looked away. I sat in the living room, wide-eyed and alert, waiting for morning. The hours dragged by, each minute stretching unbearably long. Every noise, every creak of the house made my nerves tighten. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By the time the sun rose, the fear hadn't faded. I hesitated before stepping outside, my heart hammering as I scanned the yard. The grass was undisturbed, no footprints in the dirt, no sign that anyone had been there. Had I imagined it? I wanted to believe that. But as I turned back toward the house, something caught my eye. A single handprint, smudged against the glass of my bedroom window. It was too large to be mine. I never slept with the blinds open again. Story 4. The locked room in my house had been untouched for years. It was a storage space, a place I had sealed off simply because I had no use for it. The key sat in a drawer, buried beneath old receipts and spare change. I never thought much about it until the day I found the door slightly open. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the narrow gap. I was certain I had never unlocked that door. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, pressing my palm against the wood. With a slow breath, I nudged it open and peeked inside. The room was exactly as I had left it. Dusty furniture covered with sheets, stacked boxes filled with forgotten belongings. The air smelled stale, untouched by time. But near the entrance, placed neatly on the floor, was a pair of shoes I had never seen before. They were men's shoes, black, slightly worn, but in good condition. My stomach twisted as I crouched down, hesitating before touching them. I ran my fingers over the surface, feeling the smooth leather beneath my fingertips. These did not belong to me. I stood up quickly, my breath shallow. Had someone been in my house? I checked the windows, the locks on the doors. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place. It didn't make sense. No one had a key but me. My first instinct was to search the rest of the house. I moved cautiously, checking every room, every closet, even under the bed. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone hiding. But the unease clung to me, heavy and unshakable. I returned to the locked room, staring at the shoes as if they might offer an explanation. I picked them up and examined the soles. They were clean, as if they had never been worn outside. That realization sent a shudder through me. I placed them back where I found them, then slowly backed out of the room. My hands trembled as I shut the door, this time making sure to turn the key in the lock. I stood there for a moment, listening. The house was silent, but I felt anything but alone. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the house made my heart race. I kept my phone close, debating whether I should call someone. But what would I even say? That a pair of shoes had appeared in a locked room. It sounded ridiculous. The next morning, I forced myself to check the room again. My pulse quickened as I turned the key, pushing the door open. My breath caught in my throat. The shoes were gone. I froze, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles turned white. The room was exactly the same, dusty, untouched except for the missing shoes. My chest tightened as I scanned every corner, hoping for some kind of explanation. But there was none. None. A deep, unsettling fear settled in my stomach. Someone had been here. Someone had placed those shoes and then taken them away. I stepped back, locking the door once again. But this time it didn't bring me any comfort. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my thoughts circling back to the impossible. I checked the security footage, but nothing was there, just empty hallways, locked doors. No sign of an intruder, no proof of what I had seen. That night I left the hallway light on, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house, my nerves on edge, At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. A noise woke me in the early hours of the morning, a soft creak like a door opening. My eyes snapped open, my body stiff with fear. I turned my head slowly toward the hallway. The locked room's door was open. Panic surged through me as I sat up, my breath shallow. The key was still in my drawer. There was no way that door should be open. But there it was, a dark sliver of emptiness waiting beyond the threshold. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as I stepped out of bed. My feet were unsteady, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I moved toward the door, every instinct telling me to turn back. The room looked the same at first glance, but then I saw them. The shoes were back, placed neatly near the entrance, and next to them, a single footprint in the dust. My blood turned to ice. The footprint was fresh, as if someone had just been standing there, but there was no one. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. My throat tightened as I backed away, my heart slamming against my ribs. I shut the door quickly, locking it with trembling fingers. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this house, but fear held me in place. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room with every light on. The silence was unbearable, pressing in on me from all sides. I kept my eyes on the hallway, dreading the moment that door might open again. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed my keys and left. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear and disbelief. I considered calling the police, but what could they do? There was no crime, no intruder, just a room that refused to stay locked. By the time I returned, the house felt different. The air was still, as if waiting. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand gripping the doorknob. I had to check. I had to know if the shoes were still there. With slow, measured steps, I walked down the hallway. My breath was shallow as I reached the locked room. I turned the key, my stomach twisting with anticipation. The room was empty. The shoes were gone. The footprint had vanished. The dust lay undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been there. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I closed the door, locking it one final time. I didn't care to understand anymore. I just knew that whatever had happened, I was not meant to be part of it. That night, I slept with the lights on, the key clutched in my hand. The house remained silent, but the feeling lingered. A whisper at the back of my mind, a presence just out of sight. And even though I never opened that door again, I always knew it was watching, waiting. Story 5. The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the TV. I had been home alone for hours, curled up on the couch with a blanket. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but I wasn't paying much attention. I was too absorbed in the show playing on the screen. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shadow, long and stretching across the wall, slid from one side of the room to the other. My breath caught in my throat as I turned quickly to look behind me. But the room was empty. I sat frozen for a moment, heart pounding in my chest. The windows were shut, the blinds drawn, and there was no one else in the house. I tried to convince myself that it had been a trick of the light, maybe from the TV, but deep down, I knew it hadn't come from the screen. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly stood up, scanning the room. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, nothing disturbed. I walked over to the nearest window, making sure it was locked. It was. So were the others. I checked the hallway next, my footsteps hesitant as I peered into the dimly lit space. The doors to the bedrooms were open, revealing nothing unusual inside. The silence in the house felt heavier now, as if the air itself had thickened. Taking a deep breath, I shook my head and laughed nervously. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Maybe I was just tired, seeing things that weren't there. I returned to the couch and pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to shake off the unease. Minutes passed, and I started to relax again. The show played on, and I focused on the screen, trying to forget the strange shadow. But just as I began to feel normal again, I saw it. The shadow moved across the wall once more. This time I shot up from the couch, my skin prickling with fear. I turned quickly, scanning the room, my breathing ragged. There was nothing there, no movement, no sound, no logical explanation. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly backed away. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked it. I thought about calling someone, but what would I even say? That I saw a shadow. That I was scared for no reason. It sounded ridiculous. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to walk around the house again, checking every room, every closet. I even looked under the furniture, convincing myself that I would find something that made sense, but there was nothing. I returned to the living room, still gripping my phone, and sat on the edge of the couch. My mind raced, replaying what I had seen. Shadows didn't move on their own. There had to be a source, a light, something to explain it, but I found nothing. The feeling of being watched crept over me then, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place. The walls, the corners, the windows, everything was still, but the feeling didn't fade. A sudden creak sounded from the hallway, and I sucked in a sharp breath. My heart leaped as I turned toward the noise. The floorboards had shifted, as if someone had stepped on them, but I was alone. I clenched my phone tightly, my mind screaming at me to do something. Run, leave, call someone, anything but just sit there. But I couldn't move, my body frozen with fear. Then, slowly, another shadow stretched along the floor. It wasn't my shadow. It wasn't cast from the TV or any light source I could see. It moved differently, creeping along as if it had a mind of its own. I stood up slowly, my entire body shaking as I backed away toward the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock as I kept my eyes on the shifting darkness. It slid up the wall, stretching unnaturally, as if it were alive. My breath came in quick gasps as I finally yanked the door open and stumbled outside. The cold night air hit me like a shock, but I didn't care. I turned back to the house, expecting to see someone following me, but the living room was empty. The shadow was gone. I stood there for a long time, my arms wrapped around myself, trying to calm my breathing. The wind howled through the trees, and the street was empty, silent. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I knew what I had seen. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to go back inside. I kept every light on as I moved cautiously through the house, checking every room again. Everything was as it should be, yet the heavy feeling in the air remained. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. I kept my phone close, my heart racing at every creak of the house settling. The minutes crawled by, stretching into endless hours. One morning I was exhausted but relieved to see the sun. The fear from the night before felt distant, like a bad dream. But even in daylight I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the house with me. Days passed, and I tried to convince myself it had been nothing. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I had been tired, paranoid. But deep down, I wasn't sure. And sometimes when I was alone, I still felt like something unseen was watching. Then, one evening, it happened again. I was washing dishes when I saw a shadow sliding across the wall, moving against the light. I turned quickly, my heart hammering, but the room was empty. I dropped the dish in the sink and stumbled back, my skin cold with fear. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave the house for good, but something inside me knew that no matter where I went, the shadow would follow. Story 6. The key was small, old, and slightly tarnished, with no markings to indicate where it came from. I had found it in the pocket of my winter coat, a coat I hadn't worn in months. Turning it over in my palm, I tried to remember if I had ever seen it before, but nothing came to mind. It didn't belong to any lock I could think of. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started trying it on the doors in my house. It didn't fit the front door, the back door, or even the basement door. I tried it on my bedroom door, the closets, and the small safe I kept in my office. No luck. Something about it unsettled me. If it wasn't mine, then how had it ended up in my coat? I checked the pockets again, searching for any note or clue that might explain it. There was nothing but an old grocery receipt from months ago. That night I left the key on my nightstand, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe I had picked it up absent-mindedly somewhere and forgotten about it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't supposed to be in my possession. The next morning I decided to take the key with me and test it elsewhere. I tried it on my car, but it didn't fit the ignition or the doors. At work I tried it on filing cabinets, storage lockers, and even the janitor's closet. Nothing. I started asking people if they had lost a key, but no one recognized it. My coworkers gave me strange looks when I explained how I found it. After a while, I stopped mentioning it, embarrassed by how much it was bothering me. That night, I placed the key back on my nightstand and turned off the light. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind kept returning to the key, as if it was waiting for me to figure something out. I finally drifted off just before dawn. When I woke up, the key was gone. My heart pounded as I checked the nightstand, then the floor, then the pockets of my coat. It was nowhere to be found. I turned my entire room upside down, but there was no sign of it. I tried to tell myself I had just misplaced it, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. It had been right there when I went to sleep. Someone or something had taken it. But how? That day I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept replaying the moment I first found the key. Had someone put it in my pocket? Had it always been there, waiting for me to notice? The questions nagged at me, offering no answers. I barely slept that night. Every noise in the house made me sit up, listening. I half expected to hear footsteps in the hall, the creak of a door opening, the rattle of a key turning in a lock. But nothing came. A few days passed, and I tried to move on. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, or maybe I had lost the key and just didn't remember where. But then, something else happened. I came home from work and found the key sitting on my kitchen counter. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. I hadn't put it there. I had searched every inch of the house, and it hadn't been there before. My first thought was that someone had been inside. I checked all the doors and windows, but they were locked. Nothing was missing or out of place, except for the key. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was a message from an unknown number. There was no text, just a picture. A close-up of the key, taken on my kitchen counter. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Whoever had sent it had been inside my house recently. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears as I scanned the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every dark corner. Someone was watching me. I grabbed the key and left the house, my heart racing. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I drove aimlessly, gripping the key so tightly my fingers ached. It had to mean something. I just didn't know what. After an hour, I found myself parked outside an old motel on the outskirts of town. I wasn't sure why I had come here, but something told me to check. I walked to the front desk and showed the key to the clerk, asking if it looked familiar. The man's expression changed instantly. His face went pale, and he took a step back. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. I explained that I had found it in my coat and that it had been appearing and disappearing ever since. He shook his head, eyes darting around as if checking for someone listening. "You need to get rid of that key," he said. "Now." I asked why, but he wouldn't say. He just kept repeating that I shouldn't have it, that it belonged to something or someone I didn't want to know. I pressed him for answers, but he only told me to leave. I left the motel feeling worse than before. Now I had confirmation that the key meant something, but I still had no idea what. I thought about throwing it away, but some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. It would find its way back. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a different motel, one far from the other. I locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and left the key on the nightstand. If it disappeared again, I wanted to know. Morning came, and the key was still there. I exhaled, relieved for the first time in days. Maybe I had broken whatever strange pattern had been happening. But when I picked up the key, I noticed something different. There was a small engraving on the back, one I hadn't seen before. 4 numbers 2417. My breath caught as I realized what they meant. They were a room number. The same room number as the motel I had just left. I didn't want to go back, but I knew I had to. The key wasn't done with me yet, and deep down I feared that whatever door it unlocked was already waiting for me to open it. Story 7. Steam clung to the bathroom walls as I stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around myself. The air was thick with humidity, and the mirror above the sink was completely fogged over. I wiped a hand across the glass, expecting to see my reflection appear beneath my touch. Instead, my breath caught in my throat as letters slowly emerged from the mist. The words were uneven, as if drawn by an unsteady hand. "I'm closer than you think." My stomach twisted as I stared at the message. My first thought was that someone had played a prank, but I lived alone. No one else had been in my apartment. The door had been locked. The windows shut. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The message hadn't been there before my shower, and yet now it was clear as day. I grabbed my phone from the sink, fingers trembling as I tried to think logically. Maybe the words had been written on the mirror beforehand, only revealed by the condensation. But that didn't explain who had written them. I turned, scanning the bathroom with a sinking feeling. The shower curtain swayed slightly, but there was no draft. I forced myself to pull it back, half expecting someone to be standing there. Nothing. Just the damp tiles and my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and tense. I hurried out of the bathroom, not bothering to wipe away the message. The living room was exactly how I had left it, my front door still bolted shut. I checked every closet, every possible hiding space, my skin prickling as if I were being watched. No one was there. I was alone. Trying to calm myself, I sat on the couch, gripping my phone tightly. Maybe it was a prank, something I had forgotten about. Maybe a friend had done it as a joke during a visit. but I hadn't had anyone over in weeks. The thought unsettled me even more. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let go of the message. Every creak of the apartment made me jolt upright. Every shadow seemed to stretch in unnatural ways. I kept glancing toward my bedroom door, expecting it to move, expecting to hear footsteps that weren't mine. The silence felt heavier than usual. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be some weird trick of the moisture in the air. I went about my day as normally as I could, pushing the thought to the back of my mind. But something in my apartment felt off. The air felt heavier, the rooms quieter than they should have been. It was as if I wasn't alone, as if something unseen was lingering just out of sight. That night, I hesitated before stepping into the shower again. I shook my head, cursing myself for letting my imagination get the best of me. It was nothing. Just a stupid message. I turned on the water, letting the heat soothe my nerves, forcing myself to forget about it. When I stepped out and wiped the mirror again, my heart nearly stopped. Another message had appeared. I see you. My towel slipped from my fingers as I stumbled back, my chest tightening with fear. Someone was in my apartment. Someone had to be. I grabbed my phone and ran into the hallway, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I checked every door, every possible entrance again. The locks were still intact. There was no sign of a break-in. And yet, the words were there, fresh on the glass. Undeniable proof that something was terribly wrong. I slept with the lights on that night, barely closing my eyes. Every small sound made my stomach clench. The apartment no longer felt like my own, it felt like something else had claimed it, something unseen but undeniably present. By the third night, I was exhausted, my body heavy with lack of sleep. I avoided the bathroom, brushing my teeth at the kitchen sink, unwilling to step foot in there again. But as I sat in bed, staring at my phone, something caught my eye. The closet door, which I always kept shut, was open just a crack. A chill spread through my body as I forced myself to move. My breath was shallow, my limbs tense. I stepped toward it slowly, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I reached out and yanked the door open in one quick motion. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging limply, undisturbed. I exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand over my face. I was losing my mind. Then, just as I turned away, I noticed something. A faint smudge on the mirror across the room. I stepped closer, dread rising in my throat. The condensation from my earlier shower had faded, but the writing remained, now barely visible. I could just make out the words behind you. A cold rush of terror flooded through me as I spun around. The room was empty, but I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. Something was here. Something had been watching me all along. Story 8. I had just finished a long day at work, and the soft glow of my phone screen was a welcome distraction. Sitting on the couch, I scrolled through some messages when one popped up that made my stomach drop. It was a text from an old friend, Sarah. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Sarah had passed away years ago in a tragic car accident. The message was simple, just 2 words: I miss you. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I read and reread the text, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. There was no explanation, no reason why the message would be sent to me now. I immediately went to call her, but before I could, I noticed something even more unsettling. The number had no name attached to it, just a string of random digits that looked nothing like the phone number Sarah had once had. For a moment, I thought it might be some kind of cruel prank. Maybe one of her friends had somehow gotten a hold of my number and decided to mess with me. But that didn't explain the text itself, nor the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. My fingers shook as I tapped on the screen to reply, thinking that if I could just hear from her, I might be able to make sense of this. I typed, "Sarah, is this really you?" and hit send, watching the message send without any issue. For a moment I felt a strange sense of hope, thinking maybe it was just some sort of glitch or technology playing tricks on me. But when I looked at my phone again, the message wasn't delivered. Instead, a small notification appeared, "Number disconnected." I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the screen in disbelief. The number was disconnected, yet it had sent me a message. I tried to call it, just to confirm that there had to be some logical explanation, but the call failed to connect. My mind raced with confusion and dread, trying to piece together what was happening. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone in silence. The room felt cold, and I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her laugh. The way she always made me feel like everything was okay even on the worst days. I missed her so much. It didn't make any sense. How could she be contacting me from beyond the grave? Was this some kind of sign, or was I simply losing my grip on reality? In a daze, I walked to the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, hoping it would calm my nerves. But as I passed by the old framed photo of Sarah and me on the counter, I stopped dead in my tracks. The picture, which had been taken just a year before her death, was now askew on the counter. I could have sworn I'd left it perfectly centered, but now it was tilted slightly to the side. I turned back to my phone, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that was beginning to settle in my stomach. There had to be some rational explanation. Maybe it was some sort of delayed message, or maybe my phone had glitched somehow. But as I sat back down on the couch, I found myself unable to let go of the creeping sense of dread. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, and each time I woke, I found myself reaching for my phone, hoping that maybe there would be another message. But there was nothing. The text, the strange number, it had all just been a brief moment of confusion. For days after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I called the phone company, asking if there was any possibility that the message had been sent due to some kind of error. They insisted that it wasn't possible, and when I pressed them for details, they explained that once a number was disconnected, there was no way for it to send messages, even by mistake. I told my friends about the strange message, but no one seemed to take it seriously. They all thought it was some weird coincidence, or perhaps just my mind playing tricks on me after the loss. It wasn't until I went back to Sarah's parents' house that I began to understand that this wasn't just some random occurrence. I had been close to Sarah's family after her death, and when I visited them, I expected some comfort, maybe a distraction from the chaos in my mind. Instead, I found something that unsettled me even more. Sarah's mother handed me a small envelope, her hands trembling. Inside was a note handwritten in a familiar scrawl. "I miss you too," it said. It was a message from Sarah, or at least it felt that way. But the strangest thing was that it wasn't from the text I had received. This note was written a year before her death, during a time when she was struggling with her own thoughts and emotions. It wasn't a message she had ever shared with anyone. The handwriting matched the text I had seen on my phone, and the timing was too close to ignore. My mind spun with questions. How could this note have appeared now in a place I had never seen it before? Why did it feel like Sarah was still trying to communicate with me? And why did it seem like she was reaching out through a disconnected number, just to say, "I miss you"? That night, I decided to go back to the cemetery. It was a place I hadn't visited in months. I hadn't been able to bring myself to go back there, but something inside of me told me I had to now. When I reached her grave, I knelt down and whispered, I miss you too." As I stood up to leave, I felt a strange sensation in the air. It wasn't cold, but it was thick with the weight of something unspoken. For a moment I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery, someone familiar. But when I blinked, they were gone. That night, when I got home, there was another text message waiting for me. This time the message was simple, just one word: goodbye. The number was still disconnected, but the message, for reasons I couldn't explain, filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace. Perhaps Sarah had found a way to reach me, to remind me that she was still with me, even if only for a fleeting moment. The truth of it was still a mystery, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget the last message from my old friend, even if it was a message from beyond the grave. Story 9. N. The winter air was crisp and biting as I walked through the freshly fallen snow, the soft crunch of my boots the only sound breaking the silence. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds that promised more snow soon, but for now the world was still and peaceful. The snow around me was untouched, a perfect white expanse stretching out in every direction. It was the kind of cold that made everything feel quiet, like the world was holding its breath. As I walked, my eyes caught sight of something unusual, a set of footprints in the snow ahead. They were fresh, the edges of the prints still sharp, and they seemed to lead in a straight line, disappearing into the dense woods ahead. I paused for a moment, squinting against the dull light, trying to gauge how long they had been there. There were no other marks around them, no sign of anyone walking nearby, just these footprints in the deep snow. Curiosity tugged at me, and I started walking toward them, my boots leaving new impressions in the powdery white ground. The footprints were clear, each step deep and deliberate, leaving a perfect imprint in the snow. They seemed to go on for a while, but something about the pattern felt off, like they were leading me somewhere, but I wasn't sure where. As I drew closer, the footprints began to look more unnatural. They weren't erratic, but something about the spacing, the way they seemed to land just a bit too evenly, made me uneasy. It almost looked as if someone had been walking in a straight line, methodical and deliberate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't human. They were too perfect, too precise in a way that felt wrong. I took another step forward, the air growing colder with each passing second. My breath came out in white clouds, and I rubbed my hands together to keep warm. When I reached the spot where the footprints seemed to end, I stopped short, my heart skipping a beat. The snow around me was completely undisturbed. There was no sign of the footprints continuing, no sign of anything having disturbed the ground at all. I looked down, scanning the snow around me, but the prints had vanished. The ground was smooth, unmarked, as though no one had ever walked there. It was as if the footprints had simply faded into nothingness. I knelt down, running my gloved hand through the snow, expecting to find some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. The snow was cold and solid beneath my fingers, untouched, like a blank canvas. For a moment, I stood there, confused. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Maybe it was the wind, I thought, or perhaps some kind of optical illusion. But no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, I couldn't ignore the unease creeping up my spine. I had seen the footprints, and now they were gone. That didn't make sense. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the area around me. There were no other footprints, no signs of anything unusual. The trees loomed overhead, their branches bare, casting long shadows across the snow. The world felt too quiet, too still. It was as if time had paused, holding its breath with me. A sudden chill ran down my back, and I started walking again, my steps hurried now, my eyes darting to every shadow, every movement in the distance. I tried to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone, but the more I walked, the stronger it became. I couldn't help but feel that someone or something was watching me. I pushed forward, my boots crunching through the snow faster now, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the footprints were still out there, somewhere waiting for me to find them again. But no matter how far I went, there was nothing. The snow stretched out in all directions, and the world seemed to close in on me. Then, as I reached the edge of the woods, I stopped dead in my tracks. A fresh set of footprints appeared before me, leading into the forest. They were just as clear as the last set, fresh and deep in the snow. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. I followed the new footprints, each step feeling heavier, like the air around me was growing thicker with every passing moment. The footprints seemed to wind through the trees, leading me deeper into the forest, and the deeper I went, the more unnerving it became. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving just out of my line of sight, watching me from the shadows. I reached another clearing, and as I stepped into it, I froze. The footprints were gone again. The snow around me was smooth, untouched, like I had never walked there at all. I felt a cold sweat prickling on the back of my neck as I turned in a circle, searching for any sign of where they had gone. But there was nothing. It was as if the world had swallowed them whole. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand how the footprints kept vanishing and reappearing, but the fear in my gut told me I needed to leave. I turned quickly and started to head back the way I came. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The woods were closing in around me, the trees whispering in the wind, and the snow beneath my feet felt heavier with each step. Then, just as I reached the edge of the woods, I heard something, a faint crunching sound like footsteps behind me. My blood ran cold and I whirled around, but there was nothing there, just the empty woods and the untouched snow. I stood there, my heart racing, staring into the darkness, but there was no sign of anyone. I didn't stay to find out who or what was following me. I ran, the snow biting at my legs, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't stop until I reached my car, slamming the door shut behind me. As I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I looked out into the woods. The snow now eerily still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the footprints were still out there, waiting. Story 10. The knock at the door came just as I was settling into the couch with a book. It was a soft knock, almost polite, but it made me jump nonetheless. I set my book down, puzzled at who could be visiting at this hour, and walked to the door. When I opened it, I saw a man standing on the porch, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong in the neighborhood. He had a tired, almost weary expression, but his eyes were sharp, scanning me as if sizing me up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and friendly. "Is this the house of John Mitchell?" I shook my head. "No, sorry, you've got the wrong house." The man's smile was slow to form, but when it did, it didn't reach his eyes. "I know you, though," he said, his voice a little too smooth, too calm. "You're next." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "What?" I asked, my voice faltering. His smile widened, but there was something unnerving about it, something predatory. He didn't look like he was joking. "You're next," he repeated, his gaze lingering on me a little too long. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The man didn't seem dangerous, not immediately. He wasn't holding any weapons or acting aggressively, but there was something about his presence that made my heart race. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I think you should leave," I said, my voice shaking now. The man didn't budge. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words. "It's already too late," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The moment you answered the door, you became part of the game." I felt a shiver run down my spine, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was dealing with some strange prank or something more sinister. My instincts screamed at me to shut the door, but I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. The man took a step back, still watching me with that eerie smile. "I'll be seeing you soon," he said before turning and walking away, disappearing down the stairs and into the street. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. I leaned against it for a moment, trying to shake off the unease that had settled into my chest. What had just happened? Who was that man, and why did his words feel so ominous? I checked the peephole to make sure he wasn't lingering outside, but there was no sign of him. The street was quiet, empty, as if nothing had happened at all. I almost convinced myself it was a bad joke, but deep down I knew something was wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house made me jump, and every creak of the floorboard set my nerves on edge. I kept telling myself I was being irrational, that I was overthinking the situation, but the man's words echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing hour. The next morning, I went about my day as usual, but the unease lingered, gnawing at me from the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that I was waiting for something that I couldn't control. It wasn't until the evening that I began to notice the oddities. I was sitting on the couch, watching TV, when I heard a noise at the door. It was soft at first, like something tapping gently on the wood. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I got up and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked the peephole again, but there was nothing there. No man, no one standing on the porch, just the quiet, empty space outside. I opened the door cautiously, just a crack, and scanned the area. Nothing seemed out of place. But when I closed the door again, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A small piece of paper tucked into the door frame, almost hidden from view. I pulled it out slowly, my hands trembling, and unfolded it. The note was simple, handwritten in neat, careful script. It read, "I told you, you're next." A cold chill ran through me, and the world around me seemed to tilt. Who was doing this? And why? I slammed the door shut, my mind racing. I glanced around the room, feeling like I was being watched, like there was something I was missing. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? A man knocked on my door and said I was next. It sounded ridiculous, even to my own ears. The days that followed were marked by a growing sense of paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept the blinds closed, avoided going outside as much as possible, and even double-checked the locks on the doors before going to bed. Then, the strange occurrences started happening more frequently. I'd hear faint knocks on the door late at night, just enough to make me jump. When I opened the door, there was never anyone there, only the quiet emptiness of the porch. But the note always came, slipped into the door frame or tucked under the mat. The final note was different, though. It was longer, more detailed. "The game's almost over. You can't hide anymore. When the clock strikes midnight tonight, you'll be mine." I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police, explaining everything, though I wasn't sure how they would respond to my frantic ramblings about a man who said I was next. They assured me they would send someone to check the area, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't help. That night I stayed up, waiting, listening. The clock ticked away the minutes, and when it hit midnight, I held my breath. Nothing happened. The door remained silent. The air felt still, untouched by the dread that had gripped me for days. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Maybe the man had been playing mind games with me all along. Maybe I had overreacted. But as I began to relax, thinking it was all over, the final knock came. This time, the door didn't just rattle with a light tap. It shook with force, as if someone was trying to break through. I froze. The last note hadn't been a warning. It had been a promise, and now I had no choice but to face whatever it was that was coming for me. Story 11. It started innocently enough, like any small inconvenience in life that eventually fades into the background. My watch, a simple leather-strapped piece I had inherited from my grandfather, would stop at exactly 11:11 every night. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Watches break, especially old ones. But as the days went by, it became clear that something odd was happening. Each night, without fail, the second hand would freeze at 11:11. I would wind the watch, reset the time, and go to bed. When I woke up in the morning, everything seemed normal except for the fact that the watch was still stuck at that strange time. I had tried replacing the battery, thinking that was the problem. But the next night, the same thing happened. I took the watch to a local repair shop, and the technician assured me that everything was in working order. He couldn't find a thing wrong with it. I asked him if he had any explanation for why it kept stopping at the same time every night. He looked at me, shrugged, and told me sometimes things happen. Could be a glitch. Could be something else. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I didn't know where else to turn. I tried to dismiss it, thinking I was overthinking things. After all, it was just a watch, right? A minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of life. But the fact that it always stopped at the exact same time, 11:11, gnawed at me. One night, I decided to stay up to see what would happen. I had an unsettling feeling that I was missing something, that there was more to this than I was letting on. I sat in my living room, watching the second hand of the watch as the time slowly crept toward 11:11. As the minute hand ticked closer, my heart began to race. And then it happened. At exactly 11:11, the watch stopped. But this time something was different. The air in the room seemed to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the atmosphere felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. My eyes fixed on the watch, waiting for it to resume ticking. But it didn't. I checked the watch again, pressing the buttons and trying to get it moving. But it remained still, frozen at 11:11. I looked around the room, half expecting something to change. The quiet felt oppressive, like the world had paused with me. It wasn't just the watch that felt strange. I noticed the lights flickering. At first I thought it was just a power surge, but then they flickered again, and then a third time, longer this time. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My pulse quickened, and a sense of dread settled over me. It was as though something was watching, waiting for something to happen. Unable to shake the feeling, I decided to go to bed. I set the watch down on my nightstand and pulled the covers over me, trying to calm my racing heart. But sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, feeling restless, my mind constantly returning to the watch. As I lay there, I thought about the time 11:11. It wasn't just a random time. People often talk about it being a sign, a moment of synchronicity, or a message from the universe. Some believe it's a sign to make a wish, to focus on something you want in life. But to me, it felt like something darker, like the watch was trying to tell me something. The next night, I decided to do some research. I searched online for any meaning behind 11:11, wondering if there was something I was missing. What I found was unsettling. There were numerous stories of people who experienced similar phenomena with clocks and watches. People who had seen the time 11:11 consistently, who had been haunted by it. Some believed it was a warning, while others thought it was a way for the dead to communicate with the living. I sat back, horrified. Could it be possible that my watch was trying to tell me something? I thought about the time I had inherited it from my grandfather. He had always been a mysterious man, full of secrets. Did he have left me some sort of message, hidden within the watch ticking? As the days went on, the pattern continued. Each night at 11:11, the watch would stop. Each night, the atmosphere in the room would grow heavier, and the strange, unsettling feeling would return. I started to feel paranoid, like I was being watched, like I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. It wasn't just the watch anymore. I started hearing things, soft whispers in the dark, footsteps in the hallway when I knew no one was there. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a presence in the room, but when I looked, the room was empty. The sense of dread grew stronger each night, and I began to lose track of time. Was it 11:11 yet? I tried to leave the watch behind. I thought maybe if I just stopped wearing it, the strange occurrences would cease. But no matter what I did, the watch would still stop at 11:11, no matter where it was. Even if I put it in a drawer or left it on the kitchen counter, it would freeze at that exact time. One night, I decided to confront it. I waited until 11:11, my heart pounding in my chest, and I stared at the watch. The second hand moved closer, and then, as it hit 11:11, it froze. The air grew thick, and the whispers returned, louder this time. I could hear them clearly now, but I couldn't make out the words. In a fit of frustration and fear, I grabbed the watch, intending to destroy it, to end whatever curse it had placed on me. But just as I was about to smash it on the floor, a voice clear and cold whispered in my ear, "It's too late." I froze, the watch slipping from my hand and falling to the floor. The room was silent. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then the second hand of the watch started ticking again, as if nothing had happened. Story 12. It was a Saturday morning, and I had just finished a long week of work. I needed to catch up on laundry, so I dug through the pile of clothes in the corner of my bedroom and dragged it all to the laundry room. The hum of the washing machine was oddly comforting, and I felt relieved to be tackling the growing pile. As I sorted through the clothes, I noticed something strange in the basket, an odd pair of socks. The socks were mismatched, one dark blue and the other a light gray. They didn't look like anything anyone in my house owned. I immediately thought they must have been mixed up with clothes I had brought back from the laundromat, but I couldn't remember ever seeing them before. They didn't match anyone's size either, and the stain on one of them was unsettling. It wasn't something I recognized, just a dark patch, almost like dried ink or something I couldn't place. I turned the socks over in my hands, trying to find some explanation. My mind raced through possibilities. Could they belong to a guest I didn't remember? Or maybe a neighbor had accidentally mixed their laundry with mine when they visited. But no one in my household wore socks like these, and I couldn't recall any guests who had left them behind. It didn't make sense. I showed the socks to my roommates later that day, hoping one of them would recognize them. Emma, the quiet one, frowned when I held them up. "They don't look like they belong to anyone here," she said, examining them closely. "Where did you find them?" I told her they were in the laundry basket, and she shrugged. "Maybe they're from when we had that party last month. Did anyone bring an extra bag of clothes?" That didn't sound right either. None of our friends had brought clothes to the party, and no one had stayed overnight. I started to feel uneasy, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was just some strange coincidence. Maybe the socks were old, leftovers from a time before I lived there. I threw them in the wash with the rest of the laundry, hoping it would clear up whatever odd feeling they had given me. The next morning, when I went to retrieve the laundry from the dryer, I found the socks again. They were clean now, but the stain was still there, the dark spot remaining in the exact same place. My stomach sank as I stared at them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was no way that stain hadn't been there before, and I couldn't figure out how it had survived the wash. I held the socks in my hand, staring at the stain. It looked darker now, almost like it had deepened during the drying process. I examined the socks for any labels or distinguishing marks, but there was nothing. Just plain fabric and the unsettling stain. I felt like I was missing something crucial, like the socks were trying to tell me something. I decided to toss them in the trash, but as I walked to the bin, something stopped me. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. It was as if they were meant to stay with me, as though they were a part of something larger that I couldn't understand. I dropped them back in the laundry basket instead, pushing them to the bottom as if hiding them would somehow make the problem go away. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the socks, to that strange stain. I found myself standing in the dark, staring at the laundry basket. The socks were still there, just sitting at the bottom. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was overthinking it, letting my mind run wild. But when I reached into the basket and picked up the socks again, something was different. The stain had changed shape. It now looked like a fingerprint, as though someone had pressed their finger into the fabric. My heart skipped a beat. There was no way this was just a coincidence. I quickly dropped the socks back into the basket and backed away. I felt my pulse quicken, the air in the room thick with tension. I needed to know more. I had to figure out what was happening, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed my phone and began searching for any explanation I could find, but nothing seemed to fit. No one had reported missing socks or strange stains like this. The next day, I decided to talk to Emma again. When I brought up the socks and the stain, her face went pale. "You've seen it too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I was taken aback. "What do you mean, too?" I asked, my voice shaking. Emma didn't answer at first, staring at the floor, before finally speaking again. "I've seen those socks before, in my dreams." I blinked, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean, your dreams?" I asked. "I've had the same dream over and over again, ever since we moved in here," she explained. "In it, I see those socks, and they're always covered in blood, and there's someone watching me, just standing there, waiting." Her voice quivered, and I could see the fear in her eyes. I didn't know what to say. I had thought I was the only one who had been affected by the socks, but now I was starting to believe that something was seriously wrong. Emma and I both agreed that we needed to get rid of them. But when we went to look for the socks the next morning, they were gone. The laundry basket was empty. We searched the house, but there was no sign of them. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. I felt a sinking sensation in my chest, realizing that whatever had been happening was far from over. Something about those socks didn't want to be forgotten. Days passed, and life returned to some semblance of normal, but the feeling of being watched never fully left. Every time I walked past the laundry room, I found myself glancing in, half expecting to see those mismatched socks staring back at me. I still don't know how they got there or who they belong to, but I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is still keeping an eye on me. Story 13. I had lived in my house for over a year, and yet I had never once seen my neighbor. Their house stood right next to mine, separated only by a thin wooden fence, but there was something odd about it. The windows were always covered, and I never heard any sounds coming from their side of the fence. Occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a car in the driveway, but the person behind the wheel was always hidden from view, and the house was always quiet. The only interaction I'd ever had with them was when I moved in. A handwritten note had been slipped under my door welcoming me to the neighborhood, but the signature was barely legible, just a scribbled S. That was it. No name, no phone number, nothing more than a few polite words about keeping the noise down and a brief mention of the weather. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. But something changed one afternoon when I was working from home. I was sitting in my living room, typing away at my laptop, when a loud crash startled me. It came from next door. The kind of noise that made me jump out of my seat. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, maybe a bookshelf or a piece of furniture had tipped over. My heart raced as I stood frozen, waiting for a second noise to follow, but it never came. Just silence. Worried, I decided to check on them. I had never seen my neighbor, but something about the sudden noise didn't sit right with me. It was unusual for the house to be so quiet, especially after such a loud crash. I grabbed my phone just in case and walked to the front door. I knocked twice, but there was no answer. A part of me hesitated, but the silence was too unsettling. I didn't hear anything inside, no footsteps, no muffled voices, nothing. I figured it couldn't hurt to check in person, so I cautiously walked around the side of the house and knocked on the door again. It was strange how the house seemed so still. No lights on, no cars parked in the driveway. I felt like I was intruding, but the loud crash and the absence of sound made me uneasy. I didn't know what to expect, but there was no response. The door, however, was slightly ajar. My first instinct was to call the police or at least someone else for help, but curiosity got the better of me. I gently pushed the door open, wincing as the hinges creaked. My eyes immediately searched the space in front of me. The hallway was dim, lit only by a faint light coming through the cracks in the window blinds. It looked normal enough, but the air felt thick, like something was off, like there was a sense of waiting in the stillness. The living room was empty. No furniture had been knocked over, and there were no signs of any chaos or damage. In fact, the house looked pristine. I stepped in cautiously, my footsteps muffled against the carpet. I walked slowly, glancing around at the tidy surroundings. The walls were decorated with framed pictures, none of which seemed personal. They were just generic landscapes or abstract art, nothing that told me anything about the person who lived there. I checked each room, feeling increasingly out of place. The kitchen was spotless, with neatly organized counters. The bathroom, though small, had fresh towels hanging neatly on the rack. There was no sign of anyone living there, no signs of life. No mess, nothing that would suggest someone had been living in this house for any length of time. It was as if the space was designed to look lived in but never actually used. Then I came to the back bedroom. The door was slightly open, and I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. It was small, with a single bed in the center of the room. The blankets were perfectly folded, and there were no personal items scattered around. No clothing in the drawers, no photographs on the nightstand. It looked like a hotel room, empty and devoid of any traces of a person's life. At this point, I was starting to feel like I was walking through a ghost house, a place frozen in time. It was unnerving, to say the least. I turned around, prepared to leave, but then my eyes landed on a small table by the window. There was something strange about it, a notebook half hidden beneath a stack of plain papers. My curiosity piqued. I reached over to grab it, and as I opened it, I noticed something odd. The pages were filled with nothing but lists. long lists of names, dates, and what appeared to be notes about people's movements. Some of the names seemed familiar, neighbors, acquaintances from town, and even some of my own friends. The notes, however, were cryptic. Words like "seen at the park today" or "left the house at 3 p.m., almost like someone had been tracking people's every move. Suddenly, the quietness of the house felt even more unsettling. It was as if I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. My pulse quickened, and I set the notebook back down as quickly as I could. The urge to leave grew stronger, and I turned on my heel, making my way toward the door. Just as I was about to step out of the house, I heard the faintest sound behind me. A floorboard creaked. I froze, my blood running cold. I spun around, but the house was still empty. No one had entered or left. I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, waiting for me to discover the secret that this house held. I left the door slightly ajar as I quickly made my way back to my own home. I didn't know what I had just witnessed, but I felt like I had uncovered something dark and hidden. From that day on, I couldn't shake the feeling that my neighbor was always nearby, just out of sight, watching, waiting. They were still there, even though they were never really there, and I would never find out what happened to them or why they had stopped living in that house. Story 14. I had a long day at work, and as I walked up to my front door, I couldn't shake off the exhaustion weighing on me. The sun had already set, and the chill of the evening air wrapped around me as I fumbled for my keys. The quiet of the street felt normal, but something in the pit of my stomach told me something wasn't quite right. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar scent of my apartment filling my nose. As I closed the door behind me, I immediately noticed something strange. The couch, which had always been positioned against the far wall, was now across the room, facing the opposite direction. The change was so abrupt, so out of place, that for a moment I thought I was imagining it. I stood there in the doorway, my keys still in my hand, just staring at the scene before me. I stepped further into the room, my heart beating faster. Nothing else in the apartment appeared disturbed. The coffee table was exactly where I had left it, the TV still off, and everything else was just as I had left it that morning before heading to work. But the couch, my heavy, cumbersome couch, was moved. It was too much to simply chalk up to forgetfulness or a slight shift in the fabric of my memory. Someone had been here. Now, I scanned the room again, looking for any sign of forced entry. The windows were still locked, and the door, aside from the slight movement of the handle when I opened it, was secure. I walked to the couch, my fingers brushing the fabric. It didn't feel like it had been touched recently. The cushions were settled in their usual spots, not disturbed or rumpled in a way that would suggest someone had sat down or moved things around. Still, the couch had been moved. I glanced around the room, trying to make sense of it. How could the couch have been moved if I had locked up and left this morning? Was there some kind of logical explanation? I checked the other rooms in my apartment. Everything else was as it should be. My kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom all appeared untouched. But the sight of the couch, placed so deliberately in a new spot, kept my mind racing. A creeping sense of unease began to settle in. I walked over to the windows, pulling back the curtains and peering outside. Nothing, just the usual quiet street. I stepped back, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the apartment. It felt too quiet, too still. I could feel my pulse quickening, my thoughts spinning. I wasn't imagining it. The couch had definitely been moved. But why? I returned to the living room, feeling a strange pull toward the couch. As I sat down on it, I instinctively reached for the remote to turn on the TV, but even that felt wrong. The way the couch was positioned, facing the opposite direction, left the television at an awkward angle. I should have noticed it sooner. It wasn't just the couch, it was the feeling in the air, the oppressive silence that seemed to have settled in. I checked the time on my phone and realized that I was running late for a dinner meeting I had been looking forward to. I didn't want to let the strange occurrence distract me, but the thought of the couch being moved gnawed at the back of my mind. I grabbed my jacket and keys, hoping the strange feeling would fade with time. The entire drive to the restaurant, I couldn't shake the unease. The feeling followed me, clinging to the back of my thoughts like a shadow. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the whole thing? I had locked up my apartment myself before leaving, and I knew for sure that the couch had been in its usual place. Yet here I was, feeling like I had walked into a parallel version of my apartment. The dinner meeting itself was a blur. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept wandering back to the apartment. I kept thinking about the couch, trying to rationalize it, to convince myself that it had simply been a trick of the mind. But I knew better. There was no logical explanation for it. When I returned home late that evening, I hesitated at the door. The silence was heavier now, like something was waiting for me on the other side. My hand trembled slightly as I unlocked the door, stepping into the darkened apartment. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar feeling of wrongness hit me again. The apartment was still, too still, as if everything had been frozen in time. I made my way toward the living room, my heart racing with each step, and then I saw the couch had moved again. The couch was no longer facing the opposite wall like it had earlier that evening. It was now pushed against the wall again, exactly where I had originally placed it. I stood in the doorway of the living room, frozen in place, unable to comprehend what was happening. I had seen it with my own eyes earlier. The couch had been moved, but now it was back to normal. I crossed the room, slowly at first, and knelt down next to the couch. It felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I could feel my pulse thudding in my chest as I reached out to touch the fabric. It was still cool to the touch, but there was something different about it, something that wasn't quite right. I stood up and backed away from the couch, my head spinning with questions. How could this be happening? Who or what was responsible for this strange phenomenon? My first instinct was to call someone, but who would believe me? Who would understand that I had come home to find my furniture moved without explanation? I locked the door behind me, unsure of what to do next. The thought of going back to the apartment, to that place where the couch had moved of its own accord, made my stomach churn. I didn't know what was real anymore. As the days passed, I tried to go on with my life, but the strange occurrences in my apartment kept haunting me. I checked the couch every time I came home, but no more furniture was moved. It was as though it had never happened. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Something had shifted in the fabric of reality, and I was left to wonder what it all meant. Story 15. It was an ordinary morning when I checked my mailbox, expecting the usual bills and junk mail. But nestled among the letters was an envelope that didn't look like anything I had received before. The paper was thick, almost old-fashioned, with intricate designs etched along the edges. My name was written on the front in a script I didn't recognize, the letters flowing in curves that seemed almost too elegant for everyday handwriting. Curious, I opened the envelope slowly, the faint smell of old parchment filling the air as I pulled out the contents. Inside was a small note, folded in half. The paper felt heavier than I expected, like it had been crafted with care. I unfolded it carefully and looked at the message. My stomach dropped as I realized the writing on the paper was in a language I couldn't understand. The letters weren't like anything I had seen before, swirling in an unfamiliar pattern, each symbol more complex than the last. It felt like a puzzle I couldn't begin to solve. I turned the note over, hoping for a clue, but there was nothing. The back was blank. My fingers shook slightly as I turned it back around, staring at the cryptic symbols. Despite the overwhelming strangeness of it, the note felt personal, like it had been written just for me. There was something almost compelling about it, urging me to figure out what it meant. I took the note inside and placed it on the kitchen table, where the light was better. I tried to focus, my mind racing, but the more I looked at the symbols, the more confused I became. I decided to try using a translation app on my phone, hoping that some part of the message might be translatable. After scanning the note, the app spun for a few seconds before displaying a jumble of meaningless words. Sparrow, light, forest, darkness. They didn't make sense together, and I felt a pang of frustration. I tried scanning the note again, but the words on my screen kept shifting, rearranging themselves. The letters seemed to dance before my eyes, never forming any coherent message. My frustration grew into a deep unease as I wondered what I was missing. I left the note on the table, feeling an eerie sense of being watched, and tried to distract myself with my daily routine. But every time I glanced at the kitchen, my gaze was drawn back to the note. The symbols seemed to call to me, pulling at the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to understand it, that it was important. My thoughts kept returning to that strange, unreadable writing. Why had it been sent to me? What did it want from me? As the day wore on, I felt increasingly unsettled. The more I tried to ignore the note, the more I felt its presence. My phone buzzed with messages, but I couldn't focus on anything other than the strange note in front of me. I picked it up again, holding it close to my face as if I could somehow will the symbols to make sense. But it was no use. The writing remained as baffling as ever. In a moment of desperation, I went online to search for any possible explanation. I typed in a description of the symbols, but nothing came up. I browsed forums, looking for any mention of this type of language, but each lead I followed turned up nothing. A few hours passed, and I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe it was a prank, or I had stumbled upon some obscure code that I just didn't understand. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The note felt real, too real, and the more I thought about it, the more I began to feel that it had purpose, an unsettling purpose. I decided to leave the house, hoping that getting away from the note would bring me some peace. I went for a walk around the block, trying to clear my head. But no matter how far I walked, the feeling of dread remained, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. I returned home and immediately went back to the kitchen. The note was still there, sitting innocently on the table. But now, something was different. I could have sworn that the symbols had changed. The flow of the letters seemed more distinct, more deliberate. I leaned in closer, staring at the note with renewed attention. Then, in a flash, the letters began to shift again, rearranging themselves right before my eyes. This time there were words I could almost read, time soon come. They appeared and disappeared so quickly. I wasn't sure if I had actually seen them, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. My pulse quickened, and I backed away from the table, my hands trembling. Something inside me told me to burn the note, to get rid of it and forget it ever existed. But I couldn't. The need to understand it, to uncover its meaning, was overwhelming. I watched as the words continued to shift, forming new combinations each time I looked away. I grabbed my phone again, trying to catch a glimpse of something more concrete. But each time I tried to snap a picture, the camera refused to focus properly, as if the note itself was somehow rejecting the attempt. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the note, replaying every moment of the strange words rearranging themselves in front of my eyes. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was almost as if the note had been written to lead me somewhere. But where? What was it asking me to do? The thought haunted me, filling my dreams with images of the unreadable writing and an ominous sense of impending doom. The next day, I decided to try something different. I took the note to a local antique shop, hoping to find someone who might recognize the language or have some insight into its meaning. The owner, an elderly man with a long white beard, studied the paper for a long time. He didn't say a word as he traced his finger over the symbols. Finally, he looked up at me with wide, startled eyes. "I've seen this before," he said quietly, "but not for a long time." My heart raced as I leaned in closer. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man shook his head. "I can't tell you. Not yet." He paused, his gaze shifting nervously around the shop. "Be careful. This isn't something you can just forget." I left the shop with a feeling of dread that clung to me like a heavy fog. The note had already started changing again, but now I realized something. It wasn't just the letters that moved. Something was waiting for me, something I had yet to understand. Story 16. I was going through a box of old family memorabilia when I came across the photograph. It was slightly yellowed with age, the edges frayed from years of being stored away. In the picture, my parents, siblings, and I were gathered on a beach, smiling and laughing as we stood together in the sunlight. The strange part was, I couldn't remember ever having that photo taken. I had been around 10 years old when the photo was snapped, and though I could remember most of the family vacations, this one didn't seem familiar. The image was too vivid, too clear, and yet it felt out of place. There was a man standing in the background, half hidden behind a tree, his features barely discernible but his presence unmistakable. He wasn't someone I recognized, and I couldn't understand why he would be there. The more I stared at the man in the background, the more unnerved I became. His eyes were fixed on the camera, directly at us, despite being so far away. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, something that looked out of place for a beach trip. His expression was odd, almost like a smirk, like he knew something we didn't. But I couldn't explain why I felt so uncomfortable looking at him. I turned the photo over to check for any writing on the back, hoping for a clue about where it had been taken or who the photographer was. There was nothing. No date, no location, no names, just the faintest smudge of what looked like a fingerprint. I felt a chill run down my spine as I turned it back over to look at the strange man again. How could something this unsettling have slipped past me all these years? I asked my parents about the photo the next time we spoke, trying to act casual about it. "Do you remember this vacation?" I asked, showing them the picture. My mom smiled softly. "Oh, that was a long time ago. We went to the beach in Cape Cod, I think. We had a great time, didn't we?" She went on to recount the trip, but nothing about the strange man in the background. My father, who had always been the most detail-oriented, glanced at the photo and furrowed his brow. "That's odd," he said. "I don't remember anyone else being there." "Who took the picture?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied. I thought maybe it was one of the other families who were vacationing nearby, but I trailed off, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A week later, I found myself thinking about the photo again, unable to let it go. I pulled it out of the box one more time and stared at the man in the background. There was something about his face that looked familiar. I couldn't place it, but the feeling that I had seen him before lingered in my mind. His eyes were the key, I realized. They were too familiar, too knowing. I went back to the house where we had lived during that vacation, now a memory from years ago. I tried to recall every detail of that summer, every visit to the beach, the sand between my toes, the laughter of my family. But none of it matched up with the photo. The house had long since been sold, and I wasn't sure who lived there now. Determined to get some answers, I called up my childhood friend, someone who had been with me on that trip. I asked her about the vacation, about the photo, and whether she remembered anything unusual. She didn't hesitate when she said, "Oh, I remember that trip. But that man, he wasn't supposed to be there. We all noticed him, but no one talked about it." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who was he?" I pressed. She hesitated before responding. "I don't know. We thought he was just some random guy who happened to be at the beach. But he was staring at us the whole time. It was creepy. I thought you'd forgotten about him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had no recollection of this man being there, yet my friend seemed so sure. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I asked, feeling a wave of confusion. She sighed. "We just didn't talk about it. It felt weird, you know, like something we weren't supposed to see." I felt my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what my friend had told me. Had I forgotten about the man because I was too young to understand? Or was there something more to this? The more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder if there was some hidden memory lurking deep inside me, something I couldn't access. The next few days were a blur as I searched for any answers I could find. I dug through old vacation photos, but none of them revealed anything unusual. I scoured the internet for anything related to Cape Cod vacations in the 90s, but found nothing that could explain the man's presence in the photo. Then, one evening as I was going through some old family albums, I stumbled upon another photo from the same vacation. This time it was a picture of my mom and me walking along the beach. The man from the previous photograph wasn't visible in the background, but something was different. I could just make out the shadow of someone standing just out of frame, standing in the same spot as in the first picture. I froze. The man had been following us. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. He hadn't just been an innocent bystander. He had been watching us all along, a presence in the background of our memories, uninvited and unnoticed. I had to know more, but there were no more clues to find. No one else seemed to remember anything about him. The more I searched, the more elusive the answers became. The strange man in the background of my family's photo was a mystery I couldn't solve, a piece of my past that didn't fit. And yet, no matter how much I tried to forget about him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he would always be there, lurking just out of sight. Story 17. For an entire week, I had the same dream every night. It began the same way, with me standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. The house was large, old, and eerily quiet, with windows that seemed to watch me as I made my way inside. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked through the empty rooms, and an unsettling feeling settled deep in my chest. Each time I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being drawn toward something, but I didn't know what. I made my way down the hallway, always moving forward despite the growing unease inside me. The walls were bare, and the air smelled faintly of dust and decay. There were no pictures, no furniture, just the oppressive silence that seemed to fill every corner of the house. As I walked, I couldn't help but feel like I was trespassing, as if I wasn't supposed to be there. Yet something compelled me to keep moving forward, my feet carrying me toward the end of the hall. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. It stood out in the otherwise barren corridor, an imposing presence that seemed to loom over me. The door was made of dark wood, old and weathered, with a tarnished brass doorknob. It looked out of place, as if it didn't belong in the empty house at all. I always stopped in front of it, my hand hovering over the doorknob, hesitant, terrified, but unable to turn away. In each dream, I never opened the door. The moment I reached for the knob, something inside me recoiled. It was as if a deep, primal fear gripped my chest, warning me not to open it. I would always stand there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the door and feeling the weight of the darkness behind it pulling at me. Despite my curiosity, I couldn't bring myself to step inside. Something was waiting for me on the other side, and I knew I wasn't ready to face it. The dream would always end the same way. I'd stand in front of the door, paralyzed by fear, unable to do anything but stand still. The hallway would stretch on, the silence growing louder, until I'd wake up in my bed, drenched in sweat and heart pounding. The relief of waking up would be temporary, but the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the door held something important, something I needed to confront, but I couldn't even bring myself to open it in the dream. On the 8th night, I decided that I would finally open the door. I couldn't keep running from whatever it was that had been haunting me in my dreams. As I fell asleep, I braced myself for the familiar walk through the empty house. The quiet was just as unnerving as before, and my steps echoed in the stillness as I moved down the bowel. The door at the end of the hallway was waiting for me, and this time I wasn't going to stop. When I reached the door, my hand didn't hesitate. I gripped the tarnished knob and twisted it. The door creaked loudly as it opened, the sound grating against my ears. My heart raced as I stepped inside, and the fear that had been building up inside me seemed to intensify with every step. The room was dark, too dark for me to make out any details. But I could feel something in the air, something heavy, something oppressive. As I moved further into the room, the darkness seemed to close in around me. The temperature dropped, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The silence was deafening, and the fear that had been gnawing at me throughout the dream became unbearable. I wanted to turn back, but something held me there, as if the room had trapped me in its grip. Suddenly I heard a noise. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder with each passing second. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed in the darkness, sending a chill down my spine. I turned, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the room was still empty. The footsteps continued closer now, but there was no one there. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't alone in the room. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The fear was paralyzing, holding me in place as the footsteps grew louder. My breath quickened, and I could feel my pulse racing in my neck. The darkness seemed to close in on me, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except the footsteps. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sound. Then, in the midst of this silence, I felt a presence behind me. It was like a shadow creeping up, cold and suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The terror was overwhelming, and I was rooted to the spot. I knew I was being watched, and the sense of dread was so intense that it almost felt physical, as if it were pressing down on me, suffocating me. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and the room went completely still. I dared not move, afraid that if I did, whatever was in the room with me would strike. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and I was too terrified to even breathe. Then I felt something brush against my shoulder, light as a whisper, but it was enough to send me into a blind panic. I spun around, but the room was still empty. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. My heart was still racing, and I could feel the lingering terror from the dream weighing on me. I sat up in bed, trying to calm myself, but the images of the dark room and the footsteps haunted me. I had opened the door, but I hadn't seen what was on the other side, and now I wasn't sure I ever wanted to know. The fear that had consumed me in the dream was still fresh, and it felt like the nightmare wasn't truly over yet. I didn't sleep well that night, and in the days that followed, I found myself avoiding sleep altogether. I couldn't shake the feeling that the door in my dream wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something real, something waiting for me. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, I knew I would never be able to escape it. Story 18. It was a quiet evening when I first noticed something strange. I had just finished dinner and was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, the soft glow of the screen lighting up the room. The night was peaceful, too peaceful, almost as if the usual sounds of the neighborhood had faded into an eerie silence. As I looked up, I caught a glimpse of something unusual in the corner of my vision, a dark figure standing outside my window, just beyond the curtain. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a tree or something else in the yard. But as I focused, the figure remained there, unmoving. My heart skipped a beat as I leaned closer, squinting through the glass. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, and I could see no details except for the vague outline of its form. The air around me seemed to grow colder, the silence deepening. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing to explain what I was seeing. It was too late for anyone to be walking around outside. The street was empty, and the only light in my yard came from the dim street lamp at the corner. I forced myself to look away, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But as soon as I looked back, the figure was closer. Panic surged through me. I couldn't make sense of it. The figure had moved, stepping just a few feet closer to the window. The distance between us seemed to shrink with every glance I stole. I held my breath, watching it carefully, wondering if it was just someone passing by. But the figure remained still, staring at me. It didn't move with the ease of someone walking. Instead, it was as though it had been waiting, just standing there, anticipating my every move. My pulse quickened, and I stood up, my legs shaky. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I grabbed my phone, intending to call the police, but as I did, I glanced back at the window once more. The figure had moved even closer, its outline clearer now, though still indistinct. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest, the fear clawing at me, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. I made my way to the window, trying to steady my breathing. I peered through the curtain, but it was impossible to make out any details about the person standing outside. The only thing I could see was the dark, looming shape, so close now that I could almost feel the presence of the person on the other side of the glass. A chill ran down my spine, and my instincts screamed at me to get away from the window. But I couldn't. My curiosity, mingled with a sense of dread, kept me rooted to the spot. I was afraid of what might happen next, but I knew I had to confront whatever it was. I pushed open the window with shaking hands, the cool night air hitting me in a rush. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "What do you want?" For a moment there was nothing but silence. No answer, no movement. I waited, my heart hammering in my chest. I leaned further out the window, squinting into the darkness, trying to spot any sign of life. But there was nothing. The figure had vanished. I quickly scanned the yard, my eyes darting from one shadow to the next. The darkness seemed endless, swallowing any trace of the figure. I felt a sense of relief flood over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Where had they gone? Had they run off into the night? Or was there something else at play here? I backed away from the window, my thoughts racing. Maybe it had all been a trick of the mind, a combination of exhaustion and the isolation of the late hour. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The air still felt heavy, charged with an unsettling energy. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, clinging to me like a second skin. I closed the window, double-checking the locks, though I knew it wouldn't make much of a difference if someone or something was determined to get in. I turned off the lights in the living room and sat on the couch, my phone still in my hand. I tried to distract myself, but my eyes kept darting to the window, as if expecting the figure to return. I checked the time. Almost an hour had passed since the encounter, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I considered calling a friend or even the police, but what would I say? Someone's been standing outside my window, but they disappeared when I tried to confront them. It sounded ridiculous, and part of me didn't want to appear foolish. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing thoughts, the same sense of dread started creeping back. I got up once more and peeked through the curtains, expecting to see nothing, just the empty night. Instead, I was met with the same figure, standing in the same spot. This time, it was no longer standing still. It was moving, but slowly, methodically, inching its way closer to the house. My heart pounded in my chest, and the urge to run gripped me like a vice, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. The figure continued its slow approach, its shape more defined now in the faint glow of the streetlight. I grabbed my phone again, prepared to call the police, but before I could dial, the figure stopped. For a moment there was only stillness. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, it disappeared into the darkness, just like before. I didn't wait another second. I rushed to the door, locked it, and checked every window in the house. I couldn't explain what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, like I had just been part of some twisted game. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, lights on, phone in hand, constantly glancing toward the window. The figure never returned, but the unease remained, gnawing at me. Every night after that, I couldn't help but feel like something or someone was watching. Story 19. I woke up to a quiet morning, the soft light of dawn filtering through my window. The house was still and peaceful, a stark contrast to the restless thoughts that had kept me awake the night before. I had been meaning to tackle a few things around the house, maybe clean the kitchen or rearrange the living room, but first, I needed to step outside for a breath of fresh air. I got dressed quickly and walked toward the front door, ready to start my day. As I reached for the door handle, something immediately felt off. The handle was stiff, and there was a slight resistance when I tried to turn it. I paused for a moment, confused. It had worked perfectly fine the night before. My heart skipped a beat as I tugged harder, trying to get the door open, but the handle wouldn't budge. Panic started to rise in my chest. I pulled the door handle again, this time with more force, and it came loose in my hand. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to make of the situation. It wasn't just that the handle was broken, it was as though something had tampered with it. The metal felt cold, almost too cold, and the mechanism inside felt strange, like it had been forced out of alignment. I crouched down to inspect the door, hoping that the problem was something simple, like a loose screw or a broken piece of hardware. But as I looked closer, I noticed something even more unsettling. There was a small, unfamiliar key jammed inside the lock. The key was old, its edges worn smooth from years of use. I could barely make out the design on the key, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It looked like it didn't belong. I pulled at the key, trying to dislodge it, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck in the lock, lodged there like it had been placed intentionally. I wondered if someone had tried to break into my house, but the door didn't show any other signs of forced entry. No scratches or dents in the wood, no broken glass, just a strange, broken handle and the mysterious key. My thoughts raced as I stood there, frozen in place. Who would leave a key in my door? And why hadn't they just used it to open the door? I could feel my heart beating faster in my chest, and a cold sweat began to form on the back of my neck. I turned the key slightly, hoping to get a better look at it, but that was when I noticed something even stranger. The key seemed to move ever so slightly, as though it had a mind of its own, as if something was pulling it deeper into the lock. I let go of the key in shock, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I stood there, not knowing what to do. Was someone watching me? Were they outside?